The insult landed before the champagne glasses stopped ringing. My father-in-law's voice carried easily across the packed ballroom of the Fairmont Royal York. 300 of Toronto's most powerful Bay Street executives, federal ministers, and corporate lawyers, all dressed in designer evening wear, all turning at once to look at me. That retired handyman of hers, Roderick Holloway, announced into the wireless microphone. His chest swelled with the kind of pride only old money can manufacture. Should be grateful we let his daughter through our front door. We didn't marry her. We adopted a renovation project. The laughter that followed was careful, the kind polite enough to show support without committing to cruelty. My husband stood 3 feet away, swirling a glass of Chateau Pétrus, smiling as though his father had just told a charming anecdote about a summer cottage. I leaned toward him and spoke quietly, just to him. Your father needs to stop. The federal auditors flagged the numbered company last Tuesday. This isn't the night to draw attention to the family name. He turned to me slowly, the smile dropped. What happened next lasted less than 2 seconds, but I felt it for hours afterward. The sharp crack of his open palm against my left cheek, hard enough to send my head sideways, hard enough to split the corner of my lip against my back teeth. I tasted copper. The room went silent. 300 people held their breath. My husband straightened his cuffs and looked out at the crowd with an expression of complete composure. She's had too much to drink, he announced. Then, lower, just for me, open your mouth again tonight and I'll make sure you have nothing to open it for. I stood very still. I touched the corner of my mouth with my thumb, looked at the blood, and felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years of this marriage finally give way, not break, exactly. More like a load-bearing wall that had been quietly undermined from below, finally recognizing it no longer needed to hold anything up. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I dialed my father. He answered on the second ring, the way he always does. No greeting, just ready. I kept my voice low and even. Dad, I said, it's time. I need $200 million in liquid assets by morning. I'm buying out this family tonight. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to take you back 4 years, to the Tuesday in January when I first walked into the Holloway house in Rosedale and understood, for the first time, exactly what I had stepped into. Please take a moment to like this video and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because what comes next is going to completely change how you see this story. I was 29 years old. I had just completed my articling year at a forensic accounting firm on King Street West, and I was carrying a designation that had taken me 6 years of night school, exams, and brutal practical hours to earn. Chartered professional accountant, forensic specialization. I had worked 2 jobs through university. I had grown up in a rented row house in Scarborough with my father, who drove a white pickup truck and wore Carhartt jackets with holes in the elbow. He cooked eggs on a cast iron pan that was older than I was. He called me every Sunday morning and always asked the same thing first. You eating properly? My husband's family did not know any of this when they assessed me for the first time across the long walnut dining table of their Rosedale house. My father-in-law sat at the head of it, his pewter hair perfectly combed, wearing a wool blazer that cost more than my monthly rent. He looked at my hands when we shook. He looked at my shoes when I sat. He looked at the vintage of the wine his assistant had poured before deciding I wasn't worth addressing directly. It was my mother-in-law, Beatrice, who opened the first exchange. She tilted her head with practiced sympathy and said, "We understand your father does maintenance work. How lovely for him, keeping busy in retirement." She said it the way a person drops a small, sharp thing on the floor to see if you'll notice. I noticed. I pressed my thumbnail into my palm and kept my expression neutral. My husband, Preston, sat beside his father and said nothing. He had warned me on the drive over. His family had built Holloway Construction into one of Ontario's largest infrastructure contractors over 3 generations. They had federal government contracts. They had connections. They expected a certain kind of wife, quiet, decorative, and above all, grateful. I had told myself that I loved him. I had told myself that the sharpness I sometimes saw in his eyes was just stress. I had told myself that I was a forensic accountant, not a fool, and that if something were genuinely wrong, I would recognize the signs. I was right about the last part. I just didn't recognize them quickly enough. The first 2 years of our marriage were a slow, architectural dismantling. Roderick began calling me the renovation project at family dinners as though it were an endearment. Beatrice made a habit of sighing whenever I used the wrong fork, offered an opinion about the business, or mentioned something I'd read. She once, in front of 6 of her friends at a charity luncheon in Yorkville, reached across the table to move my hands away from the bread plate and said, with theatrical gentleness, "We'll get her trained eventually." I smiled and picked up the correct fork and noted, with clinical precision, that no one at the table objected. Preston found small daily methods of enforcement. He removed my name from our joint account and replaced it with his, explaining that he was simplifying our finances. He forwarded my professional emails to himself for archiving. When a senior partner at my firm called the house looking for me, Preston told him I'd taken a leave of absence, which I had not. I learned about the call 3 weeks later, and by then the partner had filled the file with someone else. It was a Tuesday night in October, our third year, when I finally saw the full shape of what I was living inside. Preston had gone to bed early with a headache, which he sometimes did when he wanted to avoid a conversation he knew was coming. I was in the kitchen, reviewing a personal file I kept in a locked drawer that I told him contained medical records. It did not contain medical records. It contained 4 years of Holloway Construction's public filings, quarterly reports, federal contract disclosures, and the provincial procurement records I had been quietly cross-referencing during evenings when the house was quiet. The numbers had been bothering me for 18 months. Holloway Construction had won 7 consecutive federal infrastructure contracts in Northern Ontario, highway tenders, bridge restoration, municipal water projects, at bid prices consistently within 2% of the federal budget ceilings, which is statistically almost impossible without inside information. The contracts totaled $340 million, but the financials filed with the provincial registry showed that only 60% of that value had been realized through actual work. The rest, roughly $130 million, had moved through 3 numbered companies registered in Alberta, companies with no employees, no physical address, and no apparent operational purpose. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark with my coffee going cold and looked at what I had built, a complete forensic map of a federal contracting fraud, falsified bids, inflated invoices, shell corporations, and underneath all of it, a pattern of payments that traced back, ultimately, to Preston's personal accounts. I closed the folder, I washed my coffee cup and dried it and put it in the cupboard. Then I went to the attached garage, sat in my car with the door closed, and called my father. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always depended on him for. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long do you need?" 8 more months, I told him. I need the federal paper trail to be complete before anyone moves. "You'll have what you need," he said. "Your brother's already working on the filing structure." My brother Alec is a commercial litigation lawyer in Ottawa. He has my father's quietness and my mother's precision and a reputation in federal court that takes people by surprise, because he looks like he should be teaching high school geography. When he and I speak, we do not waste words. I want to be honest about something, because I think it's the part people find hardest to understand. Why did I stay? I stayed because leaving early would have handed them a way out. A wife filing for divorce triggers asset protection moves. Lawyers get called, numbered companies get cleaned up, evidence disappears. I had learned enough in my forensic career to know that the moment I walked out that door, the window for a clean evidentiary case would begin to close. I was not a victim waiting to be rescued. I was a CPA with a forensic designation, a locked filing drawer, and a father who had been waiting patiently for me to say the word. Every second Tuesday of the month, I drove my 8-year-old Civic 40 minutes north along the 400 to a truck stop diner near Barrie. It was not the kind of place where Bay Street lawyers eat lunch. Fluorescent lights, laminate tables, a coffee urn that smelled like it had been running since 1987. My father sat in the back booth wearing a fleece vest and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, his hands wrapped around a Tim Hortons double-double he always brought himself because he didn't trust the diner's coffee. To the server who called him sweetheart and kept his mug topped up without being asked, he was exactly what he appeared to be, a retired guy from the townships, comfortable in his own skin and in no particular hurry. What the server did not know was that the man in the fleece vest was Major General Duncan McAllister, retired, 31 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, the last 8 as a senior logistics commander responsible for procurement oversight across SAF operations in the north, and that after his retirement, he had spent 15 quiet years building a family trust through early investments in Northern Ontario resource land and municipal infrastructure bonds that had compounded, over time, into something that made the Holloway family's 3-generation construction empire look like a weekend renovation project. He did not talk about money. He talked about the weather and the lake trout he'd caught that week and whether I'd had a chance to call our aunt in Sudbury. And then once the server had moved to another table, he slid a plain manila envelope across the laminate and tapped it twice. Alec arrived 20 minutes later, always a little late, always carrying too many files. He sat down across from me without taking off his coat, opened his briefcase on the bench beside him, and pulled out a federal court document with a blue backing sheet. "The Competition Bureau has opened a preliminary inquiry on the Northern Ontario bids," he said. "They're not there yet, but they will be within 60 days. When they file, everything you've documented becomes part of a parallel evidentiary record. He looked at me directly. We can move on your timeline. But it has to be before the Holloway lawyers get wind of the inquiry and start shredding. Inside the envelope my father had pushed across the table was a biometric access card for the McAllister Family Trust, liquid assets, held in a federally registered trust structure, clean and unencumbered, accessible on my authorization alone. I pushed the envelope back toward my father. Not yet, I said. They're hosting the company's 50th anniversary gala at the Fairmont next month. 300 guests, federal ministers, the whole network they've spent 3 generations cultivating. I paused. I want to do this when it costs them the most. My father looked at me across the table the way he looked at me the first time I made it to the summit on a hard trail. Not surprised, exactly, but full. He put the envelope back in the bag. Your call, he said. We drank our coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The server refilled his mug without asking. When we walked out to the parking lot, Alex stopped on the gravel and looked at me and said quietly, "They have no idea, do they?" Not a single one, I said. He gave me the same clipped half nod he's given me since we were kids. The one that means, good, I've got you. Before we get to the morning of the gala and what I did in that ballroom, please make sure you've subscribed to the channel and turned on the notification bell so you never miss our stories. If you're rooting for this to go exactly where you think it's going, type the word justice in the comments right now. The morning of the Fairmont Gala was a study in orchestrated cruelty disguised as logistics. Beatrice had a makeup artist in at 7. She had laid out an evening dress for me, 3 seasons old, returned from the dry cleaner in a paper bag, on the bed in the guest wing with a note attached. This will do for the evening. Try to stay out of the media photography area. I pressed the dress, I did my own hair, I stitched my brother's encrypted USB key into the inner lining of my evening bag, next to the satellite contact transmitter my father had given me. Small, matte black, fits in a palm, 1 button, 15-minute response window. Preston found me in the hallway before the car arrived. He closed the bedroom door behind him and leaned against it with that careful, controlled stillness he used when he wanted me to feel trapped without technically having done anything yet. He was holding a 3-page document. Sign this before we leave, he said. It's a spousal indemnification agreement. If CRA ever opens a review on the numbered companies, this document makes you the signing officer of record on all 3 of them. He smiled pleasantly. It's just administrative. I took the document. I read it with the professional attention of someone who has spent a decade identifying exactly this kind of fraud instrument. Then I looked up at him. Preston, I said, keeping my voice even and a little confused, the way I'd learned to sound when I needed him to keep talking. This lists 3 Alberta companies I've never heard of. 1847392 Alberta Limited, 19-2541 Alberta Limited, and Norgate Holdings. Who are the beneficial owners on these? He exhaled, the short, sharp exhale of a man who has stopped pretending to be patient. He crossed the room, leaned in close, and told me, in concise and clinical detail, exactly how the numbered companies worked, exactly how the federal contract money had moved, and exactly how my name on that document would make any subsequent prosecution redirect toward me. He said all of this within range of the Department of National Defense-grade audio recorder stitched into the seam of my evening jacket 3 weeks prior. I took the pen from his hand. I scratched a symbol that was not my legal signature onto the line. I handed the document back to him. He folded it into his breast pocket without looking at it. In the car, Roderick talked about the guest list. Beatrice touched up her lipstick. Preston watched the city slide past the window. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and my pulse at a steady 60 beats per minute and 4 years of careful document-by-document preparation sitting very still inside my chest. The Fairmont Royal York was lit gold from the street. 312 guests were already inside. The ballroom was everything the Holloway family believed themselves to be. Crystal, mahogany, white linen, the kind of room designed to make people feel small unless they belong. Roderick went directly to the podium. Preston walked ahead of me without extending his arm. Roderick's speech began well: company history, family legacy, contributions to Ontario infrastructure. His voice was practiced and warm. He knew how to hold a room. Then he paused. He looked at me, and he made the mistake that men like him always make when they have spent a lifetime without consequence. He decided that a public event was the best place to remind me of my position. Some of you may know, he said, with that particular warmth that is really contempt in evening wear, that Preston's wife comes from somewhat more modest origins. Her father, a fine fellow, I'm sure, did maintenance work for most of his life. Handyman type. He lifted his glass toward me. The Holloways have always believed in giving back to the community, even when the community comes through the service entrance. The room produced the sound of people who were not sure whether to laugh, deciding in the direction of the powerful man at the podium. I stepped forward and spoke quietly, just loud enough for Preston beside me. Call it off. The Competition Bureau file opened 6 days ago. The RCMP Financial Crimes Unit received Alec's brief this morning. This is your last window. Preston's face shifted in a way I had seen before, the particular rearrangement that preceded a decision he'd already made. He grabbed my wrist, yanked me toward him, and drove his open palm hard across my left cheek in front of every person in that room. The sound carried through the stage microphones. The room went absolutely silent. Preston rolled his neck and addressed the crowd with the smooth confidence of a man who has never been held accountable for anything in his life. She's had too much. My apologies. Then to me, quietly, not another word. I straightened up slowly, I touched my lip, I looked at the blood on my thumb. And 4 years of careful, strategic patience clicked into place like the last tumbler in a lock. I reached into my evening bag and pressed the black transmitter once, firmly. Then I took out my phone and called my father. He answered before the second ring. I spoke clearly, facing the microphone, facing the crowd, facing Preston's expression as he began to understand, too late, that something had shifted irrevocably. Dad, I said, release the trust. 200 million. I'm acquiring the Holloway debt structure tonight. I ended the call, I put the phone away. I looked at Roderick, I looked at Preston, I looked at 312 people who had laughed or said nothing or looked away. I said, into the microphone, my name is Thea McAllister Holloway. I am a chartered professional accountant with a forensic designation from the University of Toronto. For the past 4 years, I have been documenting federal contract fraud, money laundering through Alberta numbered companies, and the systematic diversion of approximately $130 million in Infrastructure Canada funding. The RCMP Financial Crimes Unit received my brother's evidentiary brief at 9 o'clock this morning. I walked to the AV panel at the side of the stage without hurrying, plugged the USB key into the master input port, entered a 3-digit override, and watched the main screen populate with 4 years of forensic documentation. Wire transfers, numbered company records, invoice falsifications, and Preston's voice, clear as a broadcast, explaining exactly where $130 million in federal money had gone. The room erupted. Preston lunged for the panel. 2 RCMP officers in plainclothes who had been standing near the catering station for 40 minutes were moving before he reached the third step. He was on the floor, hands behind his back, before the crowd had fully processed what they were watching. Roderick reached for his phone. Alec was already beside him, in a suit I didn't recognize, changed in the car, holding a stack of documents with the federal court seal on the cover page. Roderick Holloway, he said quietly, the way he says everything, these are federal asset freeze orders issued by the Ontario Superior Court of Justice this afternoon. Your accounts, the numbered companies, and all Holloway construction assets are under immediate receivership. Beatrice made a sound I won't describe. Her friends backed away from the table as though the tablecloth had caught fire. The main ballroom doors opened. My father walked in. He was not wearing a fleece vest. He wore his Canadian Armed Forces service dress, the dark rifle green, the gold buttons, the rows of service ribbons and commendations earned over 31 years of operational command. The gold maple leaf rank badges on his shoulders catching the light of the chandeliers. A man who has spent a lifetime being underestimated by men exactly like Roderick Holloway, walking down the center aisle of a room full of them, and taking his time about it. Every person who had laughed when Roderick called him a handyman was now completely still. My father stopped at the base of the stage steps. He looked up at Roderick with the particular quiet that only comes from someone who has never, in his adult life, needed a room to validate him. I did some maintenance work, my father said pleasantly. You're right about that. Mostly on the northern grid, logistics oversight for CAF infrastructure operations in Nunavut and the Yukon, 2003 to 2011. Then asset management. He tilted his head slightly. The trust your son's company has been stealing from federal contracts to fund. We're the ones who built that infrastructure to begin with. He came up the steps and stood beside me. He put his hand on my shoulder, just briefly, the way he did on the ridge in Algonquin the first time I made it to the top, and then he held out the trust authorization document for my signature. I took the pen. I signed my full legal name, neat and unhurried, in the center of the line. On the screen above us, the Holloway construction logo dissolved and was replaced by the registered emblem of the McAllister Foundation for Veterans and Housing Stability. Preston had been helped to his feet by a federal officer and stood at the edge of the stage, looking at me with the face of a man who has just understood, fully and finally, the difference between power that is inherited and power that is built. He said my name. He said he was sorry. He said things that were technically words but had no structure I could recognize as meaning. I looked at him for a moment. The foundation is going to do good work, I said. Get yourself a lawyer. I turned away and did not look back. 3 RCMP officers escorted Preston and Roderick out of the ballroom. Beatrice was speaking to a federal liaison officer near the back wall, her hands shaking as she tried to locate counsel on her phone. The room of 312 people was very quiet, and then, from the far left table near the east windows, someone began to clap, slowly at first, then not slowly at all. My father offered his arm. I took it. We walked down the center aisle of the Fairmont Royal York together, and the room parted for us, and no one said a single word that required a response. Outside, the night air off Lake Ontario was cold and clear. Alec was already on the steps, already on his phone, already managing the next 12 hours. He looked up when I came through the doors, and he gave me the nod. 7 days later, I signed the foundation charter at a folding table on the McAllister family property north of Barrie, 23 acres of boreal bush and lake frontage, that my father bought in 1988 for $40,000 and had never once considered selling. Alec handed me a pen. My father stood off to the side with his coffee, looking at the tree line the way he looks at things he is satisfied with. The McAllister Foundation for Veterans and Housing Stability was capitalized at $190 million in liquidated Holloway assets, their Bay Street accounts, their Rosedale house, the Alberta numbered companies unwound by federal order. The foundation mandate, legal aid, transitional housing, and financial counseling for abused spouses and veterans navigating complex systems. The kind of help I wish I had known existed 4 years earlier. I signed the document. I handed the pen back to Alec. My father came and stood beside me and looked out over the lake, which was flat and silver in the morning light. You could have left at any point, he said. It was not a question. I know, I said. But you wanted to finish it. I wanted to do it right. He was quiet for a moment, then he said you did. The foundation's first intake session was 3 weeks later. 16 people around a table in a rented office in Scarborough, 8 of them veterans, 6 of them women rebuilding after financial abuse, 2 of them both. I sat at the head of that table in the same Carhartt jacket my father used to wear, with a legal notepad and a thermos of coffee, and I listened to every single person in that room tell me what they needed. I took notes on all of it. The thing about being underestimated is that people do all the preparatory work for you. They assume you are small, they show you exactly where the gaps are, they hand you the documents and tell you to sign. They deliver the insult into a live microphone in front of 300 witnesses and never once consider that the quiet woman standing at the edge of the stage might be the one person in that room who built something real. You don't survive that kind of marriage by becoming hard. You survive it by knowing exactly what you're worth, even on the days when no one else in the building does. I knew what I was worth. I knew it the whole time. If this story stayed with you, please like it and share it with someone who needs to hear it today, because your strength might be exactly what someone else is looking for right now.